Ladies and gentlemen, MrCropper here. We're going to do a little bit of Immanuel Kant. We are doing the Critique of Pure Reason, translated by J.M.D. Meiklejohn. And we're going to start the preface to the first edition, 1781. You can find this at gutenberg.org. First sentence. Human reason in one sphere of its cognition is called upon to consider questions which it cannot decline, as they are presented by its own nature, but which it cannot answer, as they transcend every faculty of the mind. So, there's a particular sphere of cognition in which human reason is called upon to consider questions, necessarily called upon, can't decline it, is necessarily called upon to consider questions presented by its nature that it can't answer. Alright, so human reason in some sphere of cognition is limited. It can't answer questions about its own nature. And the reason it can't do this is because they transcend every faculty of the mind. So human reason is limited because they transcend every... What is they? I'm going to read the sentence and you tell me what they is. Human reason, in one sphere of its cognition, is called upon to consider questions which it cannot decline, as, the questions are presented by its own nature, but which it cannot answer, as the questions transcend every faculty of the mind. So the questions about the human reason is called to consider transcend every faculty of the mind. Alright, there are questions about the mind, then, which make human reason, which human reason cannot answer. Okay. Alright? There are questions about the mind human reason cannot answer. First sentence. You see why people have respect for Kant? Because you can just open it and start reading it and you have to turn your brain on immediately. You can't sleep through it like parts of Heidegger where it's just like, nobody could make sense of that anyway, don't even try. This, if you work at it, you can see what he's saying, and sometimes it's nonsense. I mean, this one he says transcend every faculty of the mind. What does transcend mean? And we're just going to take it to mean go beyond and past, out of the material and into abstract or something, right? We've got to keep it floating in our mind because he doesn't really mean anything real. He's just a garbage nonsense thinker. Okay, next paragraph. It falls into this difficulty without any fault of its own. So, reason has this problem of being unable to answer these questions without it being faulty, just by its nature. So even a person with a perfectly good reasonable intellect is going to have these problems. It begins with principles which cannot be dispensed with in the field of experience. What begins with principles? Human reason? Well, let's assume he means human reason still. Because it falls into difficulty refers to human reason. So now human reason begins with principles which cannot be dispensed with in the field of experience, and the truth and sufficiency of which are at the same time ensured by experience. Okay, so human reason begins with principles that cannot be dispensed with in the field of experience. What is the field of experience? So, as long as, let's just say while you're in the field of experience, you cannot dispense with the principles of human reason. Okay? That's what he's saying there. And the truth and sufficiency of which, these principles, I guess, at the same time are ensured by experience. Okay. So we know these principles are true through experience, and in order to use reason, we have to use these principles which cannot be dispensed with in the field of experience. Now, we might have to take issue with that bit of the sentence right there. Because what if what he's saying, what if what we would say is some of these principles are the base and others are built on them. And he's trying to look at the field without a hierarchy. He's saying that either this thing goes in the field or it doesn't. And he's saying it does. It is required to be in the field. And we would say, well, except it's at the bottom of a hierarchy. What if that were the case? So let me read that sentence again and try it. Reason begins with principles which cannot be dispensed with in the field of experience, and the truth and sufficiency of which are at the same time ensured by experience. Okay. I think what he's trying to do there is he's trying to say that when we use reason, we're going to have to use sensory perception and principles, and those sensory perception and principles are proven by themselves, and therefore they are not a sufficient foundation for reason. I think that's what he's getting at. Alright, let's just put that as the best approximation we can do and go to the next sentence. With these principles, now these principles, these principles that are necessary in the field of experience and that are ensured by experience. So we need these when we're in the field of experience, and we know they're true through experience, or we say they're true because of experience. These principles, with these principles, it rises in obedience to the laws of its own nature. I guess reason rises in obedience to the laws of its own nature to ever higher and more remote conditions. Alright, so I guess that an objectivist would call those abstractions, huh? But it quickly discovers that in this way its labors must remain ever incomplete because new questions never cease to present themselves. Thus it finds itself, so he's talking about rationalism now. He says, when you let go of reality, things just go crazy. And thus it finds itself compelled, reason finds itself compelled to have recourse to principles which transcend the region of experience. So because when we let go of the region of experience, everything starts to go crazy up there, we're going to have to come up with principles that transcend experience in order to put everything in order up there. Okay? So right off the bat he says, there's a Platonic realm that doesn't make sense because it's not connected to the senses. Therefore, we're going to have to come up with principles which transcend the senses in order to make sense of the Platonic realm, which is senseless. Okay. While they are regarded by common sense without distrust. It finds itself compelled to have recourse to principles which transcend the region of experience while they are regarded by common sense without distrust. So, he says he's going to make up rules for this Platonic super reality that will help make sense of it, even though it's not connected through the five senses, and they are not going to seem unreasonable. A common sense reading of them by a reasonable person would accept it. Okay? That's what he says there. Next sentence. It thus falls into confusion and contradiction, reason, thus falls into confusion and contradiction from which it conjectures the presence of latent errors, which, however, is unable to discover. So it can't discover errors inside of it. So because it's disconnected from reality and we can't make sense of it, it falls into contradictions. There are errors that it can't get out of. It's unable to discover the errors because the principles it employs, transcending the limits of experience, cannot be tested by that criteria. The arena of these endless contests is called metaphysics. Now, the previous sentence there was a damn mess because I don't know what it followed from the sentence before. I'm going to do it again real quick because I just want to make sure. But it quickly discovers, the reason quickly discovers in this way, its labors remain ever incomplete because new questions never cease to present themselves. Right, so when you're floating, la la la. Thus, it finds itself compelled to have recourse to principles which transcend the region of experience. So you're compelled to try to put order into this Platonic realm. Principles that are regarded by common sense without distrust. Okay, so we're trying to put the Platonic realm into order through principles that are not connected to through the senses. Reason thus falls into confusion and contradiction. Now, if that means that when reason gets divorced from the senses, it falls into confusion and contradiction. If that's what he's saying there, then he must be here to stop that from happening anymore. He must be here to put the Platonic realm in order once and for all. Is that what he's doing? So it falls into confusion and contradiction, from which it conjectures the presence of latent errors, which, however, it's unable to discover. Alright, so once they've fallen into error, they look around and they say, I wonder if we've got something wrong, but they can't find out what they've got wrong because the way that they're looking, the principles they're employing, transcend the limit of experience. There's with that word transcend again. And cannot be tested by that criterion. So they go beyond experience. Okay, in what way? There's that word again. He's going to keep operating on the word transcend. It's his magical word, isn't it? It's his word that he doesn't have to define, and he gets to just put it in there when he needs to do whatever magical thing he's doing. We don't know what transcend means. It just means to go past the material and beyond into the non-material. That's all it means. So the arena of these endless contests is called metaphysics. Okay. Time was when she was the queen of all the sciences, and if we take the will for the deed, she certainly deserves, so far as regards the high importance of her object matter, this title of honor. Was that a complete sentence? Okay, I don't think so. Time was when, I guess she is reason. Time was when reason was the queen of all the sciences. I guess if that's the thought, then that's a complete thought. And if we take for the will of the deed, she certainly deserves, so far as regards the high importance of her object matter, this title of honor. So, reason is the queen of all the sciences and deserves it so far as regards the high importance of her object matter. So, the things that reason works with are top of the line and honorable. Therefore, she is queen of the sciences. Now, it is the fashion of the time to heap contempt and scorn upon reason, and the matron mourns, forlorn and forsaken, like Hecuba. And then there's some Latin from Ovid. At first, her government, under the administration of the dogmatists, was an absolute despotism. Reason under the dogmatists. What's that? The Dark Ages? But as the legislative continued to show traces of the ancient barbarian rule, her empire gradually broke up, and intestine wars introduced the reign of anarchy, while the skeptics, like nomadic tribes who hate a permanent habitation and settled mode of living, attacked from time to time those who had organized themselves into civil communities. So he's talking about the M type and the D type, if you know Leonard Peikoff's dim hypothesis. He says the M type had civil communities and the D type occasionally attacked them, and this is a metaphor for philosophy and reason. But their number was very happily small, and thus they could not entirely put a stop to the exertions of those who persisted in raising new edifices, although no one settled, although on no uniform or settled plan. So he's saying that philosophy, the people who are building things and erecting structures, don't have a plan together. They're all just sort of off doing their own thing. And the skeptics keep attacking. So I think he wants to get everybody together in a uniform plan, all of the people who aren't skeptics. Right? That's what his metaphor is saying here. In recent times, the hope dawned upon us of seeing those disputes settled, and the legitimacy of her claims established by a kind of physiology of the human understanding. that of the celebrated Locke. So he says Locke tried recently, but it was found that although it was affirmed that this so-called queen could not refer her descent to any higher source than that of common experience, a circumstance which necessarily brought suspicion on her claims, as this genealogy was incorrect, the so-called queen could not refer her descent to any higher source than that of common experience. So because the evidence of the senses was all that was offered, there was suspicion brought on her claims. And this genealogy was incorrect. She persisted in the advancement of her claims to sovereignty, even though she was incorrect in it. So Locke didn't give a more firm foundation than common experience. Okay, why is common experience not a more firm foundation? Because he needs something subtracted from reality in some sort of higher realm of reason. To a higher source than of common experience. Okay. Thus metaphysics necessarily fell back into the antiquated and rotten constitution of dogmatism, and again became obnoxious to the concept from which efforts had been made to save it. Metaphysics fell back into the antiquated and rotten constitution of dogmatism. Alright, so we can't do dogmatism, we have to be able to think rationally, right? At present, as all methods according to the general persuasion have been tried in vain, there reigns naught but wariness and complete indifferentism, the mother of chaos and night in the scientific world, but at the same time the source of, or at least the prelude to the recreation and reinstallation of a science, when it has fallen into confusion, obscurity, and disuse from ill-directed effort. So I take all that to mean that science, in his time, in his day, is a mess, and he wants to sort it out. And you'll have to rewind and read it for yourself. I'm not going to sort it out any more than that. Next paragraph. For it is, in reality, vain to profess indifference in regard to such inquiries. So we have to take an interest in these inquiries, the object of which cannot be indifferent to humanity. So we have to take interest in these inquiries because it's important to us. Besides, these pretended indifferences, however much they may try to disguise themselves by the assumptions of a popular style and by changes on the language of the schools, unavoidably fall into metaphysical declarations and propositions. So if you try to be indifferent to the subject, you will make metaphysical declarations, and which is basically philosophy. So if you try to ignore philosophy, you're going to have to make philosophical declarations, which they profess to have contempt for. So, he says we have to be interested in this subject, because even if you try to ignore it, you are going to have views on it. At the same time, this indifference, which has arisen in the world of science, and which relates to that kind of knowledge which we should wish to see destroyed the last, is a phenomenon that well deserves our attention and reflection. This indifference is a phenomenon that deserves our attention and reflection. So these people who are ignoring the subject, we need to talk about them. It is plainly not the effect of the levity, but of the matured judgment of the age, which refuses to be any longer entertained with illusory knowledge. So, it's not a light-hearted matter. It's a serious matter that we haven't figured out exactly what knowledge is. This is very serious. It is, in fact, a call to reason, again to undertake the most laborious of all tasks, that of self-examination, and to establish a tribunal which may secure in its well-grounded claims, while it pronounces against all baseless assumptions and pretensions, pretensions, not in an arbitrary manner, but according to its own eternal, unchangeable laws. Quite a sentence there. Now, it's a mess because he's got two sentences glued together. It's plainly not the effect of the levity. That's right. So we have to be serious about these people. Oh dear. Oh dear. No, don't do that. We have to be serious about these people. And it is in fact a call to reason. So when we're trying to get these people interested in this problem of knowledge being illusory, we are calling them to reason, to undertake a laborious task of self-examination against baseless assumptions and pretensions. So we're calling people to reason, not in an arbitrary manner, but we're doing it against baseless assumptions and pretensions. And we're doing it according to eternal and unchangeable laws. So he says, everybody relax. Everything I'm doing is not arbitrary. It's according to eternal and unchangeable laws. And it's very, very important that we do this because right now knowledge is illusory. And we can't understand the true nature of knowledge. So it's very important that we get everybody on board with this and do this according to eternal, unchangeable laws. And we have to root out these baseless assumptions and pretensions. Okay. This tribunal is nothing less than the critical investigation of pure reason. Pure reason. What is pure reason? Now, footnote, matured judgment. So that is to say that the day and age that he was in, they are not being superfluous when they try to redefine knowledge and get it on a more firm foundation. They're being mature, and the footnote goes into that. It says, we very often hear complaints of the shallowness of the present age and the decay of profound science, but I do not think that those which rest upon a secure foundation, such as mathematics, physical sciences, etc., in the least deserve this reproach, but that they rather maintain their ancient fame, and in the latter case indeed far surpass it. The same, so he says science is amazing, it's accomplished a lot. The same would be the case with the other kinds of cognition, if their principles were but firmly established. Oh, okay. So he wants all of philosophy, all of economics, everything to be on a firm scientific basis. Now, if that's the case, then we can see where Karl Marx comes in. Karl Marx takes Immanuel Kant, and he says, let's not just leave economics in a mess like it is. Let's do it in a scientific way. Let's look at the science of what's going on with economics. And so he brought science into it, right? That type of science, the type of science that Kant is talking about right there. He wants to far surpass the fame of mathematics and the physical sciences with all the other sciences. He wants all realms of thinking to be as clear and solid as the realms of physical sciences. To far surpass. All these other kinds of cognitions, the same would be the case with them if their principles were but firmly established. So that is his job now. That's his endeavors, to firmly establish the principles of cognition so that all of human endeavor and thinking can be as firmly established as math and the sciences. Okay? Continuing. In the absence of this security, indifference, doubt, and finally severe criticism are rather signs of a profound habit of thought. Okay, because we do not have this security, people who are indifferent, doubtful, and critical are actually profound. People who are indifferent, doubtful, and critical are actually profound. Okay? Our age is the age of criticism, to which everything must be subjected. Sacredness of religion, the authority of legislation, are by many regarded as grounds of exemption from the examination of this tribunal. But if they are exempted, they become the subjects of just suspicion, and cannot lay claim to sincere respect. Now, Immanuel Kant was a Renaissance or Enlightenment thinker. And what he just said right there was, he says, I'm going to investigate everything. And if you don't let me investigate a certain thing, it will become the subject of a just suspicion. Suspicion of justice. There will be justice and suspicion against it. And it will not be able to lay claim to sincere respect, which reason accords only to that which has stood the test of a free and public examination. So, he was in favor of freedom of speech, he was in favor of reason, right? Except he wasn't. He's trying to destroy reason, as we've seen the whole way. But if you're an idiot who can't think for yourself, you read over this and you say, well, Kant is trying to bring us science, he's trying to bring us reason, he's trying to save logic, he's trying to make cognition on a firm foundation. No, he's trying to make cognition above and beyond the senses on a firm foundation. That's nonsense. That's nonsense on stilts. Alright, so that's Kant number 1, ladies and gentlemen, down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down to the 6th paragraph on the preface to the first edition. MrCropper out.